I open up ESPN for a basketball game and they have their stupid win probability calculator. I know that's not good. I know that they would never, ever fade. They would never, ever let me bet against their win probability because it's just not even close. And I think with basketball being less solved, you would just be like, okay, that doesn't really mean anything. You would just be like annoyed looking at it half the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I don't know, this will sound weird. I think you guys are like the opposite audience that the NBA cares about, right? And I think that,
that's not weird at all. You're 100% right.
Hey, let's get real. You guys like getting real. So
this is Hot Hand Theory. This is a podcast where we talk about the NBA, break things down from an analytical perspective. I'm your co-host, XJ. As always, he is my brilliant co-host, Geoff. And today, Geoff, we have a hugely special guest, especially to me. For those who don't know, I've actually loved the game of chess before I loved basketball. So we are ecstatic to have on to talk about NBA, to talk about chess, the chief chess officer of chess.com, really just an ambassador and spokesperson for the game of chess overall, Mr. Danny Rensch. How are you doing, Danny? Thanks for being on with us.
I'm doing great, man, and I really appreciate the intro. And I am a fan of the NBA as well, so I'm excited to. I'll try not to steer this conversation only toward us talking about the NBA and complaining about my Phoenix Suns. But I'm really excited to be here. Appreciate you having me, and this exciting, crazy world of NBA chess crossover continues.
Yeah, and that's so funny that you say that because I was just talking to Geoff about this before you hopped on. Like, I'm worried about just only talking about chess. I was like, we got to remember, Geoff, this is an NBA podcast. We can't just be sitting here talking about.
We'll balance each other out, so don't worry about it. We'll balance each other out, and Geoff will keep us honest.
Definitely. Geoff, you do not play chess, sir, but as most of our audience knows, you're a former professional poker player. Actually, now that I think about it, I don't even know if you could be considered a former professional. You're about to compete in the World Series of Poker. Is that in a few days? Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm flying out tomorrow. So yeah, to play the main event for the 13th time. I've played every year since 2011. So yeah, it's crazy. Like if somebody was like, you're going to start an analytics podcast related to the NBA and you're going to talk about like game theory and shit like that, I would have been like, it's pretty unlikely that anybody can like match my level, but then you come along and it's like, you're really good at chess and you're really smart. So I don't know what to say besides
what's your highest ever finish at the World Series?
I forget what place I got, but I had like a pretty deep run in 2014, okay. top 300 or something. But then the World Series has like a bunch of side events. I don't know how much you know about it, but
a little bit. The crossover between chess and poker is obviously a pretty real one as well. In fact, that some of our most influential creators, the Botes sisters and some others, are very active in the poker scene. And so I know just enough about it to sound like an idiot if we were to talk about it. So let's actually not do that. But I know enough about it.
She is like, for anyone out there,
Alex specifically,
Alex, who plays a lot of poker. Like she is a solid encapsulation of like chess versus poker and how like she's just brilliant. And the fact that she just picked it up so quickly, it would take me the next 10 years to pick up chess in the time that she picked up poker. It was like instantaneous. And she's just like, the way she talks about it, the way her brain has already like captured it, it's super impressive. And it like, yeah, I mean, there are people in the poker world. There's this guy, Dan Smith, who's one of the most successful poker players.
Dan's a friend of mine. Yeah.
Oh, really? Yeah, I've known
him.
Also
a chess master, and he was a sponsor of one of our Pro Chess League teams, an event series that we've been holding for many years now. So I actually know Dan pretty well. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say I met him at Turning Stone, New York in 2008 when I was 18 years old. He was super just like influential to me. He's my age, but like I always looked up to him, and dude played chess like his whole life. He played competitive chess. And so it's no surprise that he just like is one of the most successful poker players of all time. Cause he's just like, I feel like there's a really strong correlation between you see poker players who are like really good at like card games, like, I don't know, Magic the Gathering, not to get too nerdy, or like chess. And they're the ones who just kind of weed their way to the top and are still around today. Cause, you know, this isn't about poker at all, but the people who are still crushing poker today, they are by far like the most impressive. And it's a cool thing. And it's a really cool crossover for me too. Is this is a long way of saying that, because as a poker player, I have a lot of admiration and respect for people who can crush chess so hard and people who can just grasp that.
Yeah. And for those listening, if you haven't recognized it yet, this is going to be a little bit of a unique episode. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk with Danny about, we already started some of the overlaps and similarities between chess and basketball, chess and poker, including themselves, how data and analytics are kind of being leveraged, some of the ways the games are being marketed and grown. And we're going to also talk about how chess has kind of infiltrated the NBA with more and more players getting into it. I've read a couple articles just hearing really awesome stories about how, world championship level players are really very much invested in chess. But let's start with the analytics side, if we can do that. We're an analytically thinking podcast over here. Danny, I know you've done several appearances at the Sloan Analytics Conference, where you've talked about, Chess Engine's approach to the game and other things. So I'm just kind of wondering if you could tell us a little bit about that, and then I really want to think about how analytics has changed basketball in a way that a lot of fans don't seem to really like, and compare it to how chess engines may have changed chess in a way that maybe some chess fans don't seem to like as well, like maybe more traditional chess fans. So I was just wondering if you could kind of give us a little bit of an explanation about like chess engines and how they've kind of changed the approach to the game of chess, since they've come around and improved so much over the last, decade plus.
Can I also ask a follow-up before you jump into that?
He's already given me that's such a huge topic.
my only, it's a bit of a joke, but are there any people who are like, screw the data, I play chess by feel? And how do they do?
No, I'm actually glad, jokes aside, that you added that question, because the context surrounding why that's even a question is probably actually the first place to dive into. And it's a fascinating topic. The world we live in, right? I mean, like, all of us remember a time when there was no internet. I think we're all old enough for that. I don't know. Maybe I'm much older than you guys. Maybe I just dated myself.
Barely, but Geoff is a little younger than me. But yeah, vaguely remember that. At least
before the internet we know today was a thing, right? Because the early internet, and then of course access to information, and then how everything evolved from traditional approaches to anything based on what the theories were, what the ideas were that people thought were the best, getting challenged by this overwhelming amount of now, okay, I said the internet shrunk the world in terms of access to information, but over time, of course, the investment in large data at scale, literally the Moneyball meme of we'll make it up in the aggregate, and what exactly sabermetrics have done. The truth is, I am not the most qualified person in any way to talk about advanced analytics in basketball. But I do love the topic, and a really good friend of mine is actually Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey is in many ways, I guess, considered to be like a bit of the godfather of some of this stuff. Obviously, he grew up in the Bill James School. There's a reason that there's literally a Bill James Hall every year at the Sloan Analytics Conference, because that is an ode that Daryl will forever give to Bill James, the father of sabermetrics, right? And I've been, the reason I speak at Sloan and dive into a lot of the topics that you just kind of touched on real quick there is because of Daryl. Daryl, for those who don't know, is actually a very good chess player. By I think global standards, he wouldn't say that, but he's about 1500 rated. He's better than that in many ways, in my opinion, but he struggles in faster time controls because Daryl, not David, is very much a complete information kind of guy. I think that his personality when it comes to data struggles with the parts of chess that actually are just a game, that you do have to rely on intuition. And at some point, the fork in the road comes where you either have to make a move based on whatever information is reasonable given how much time you have, or you keep thinking to make the right move and then end up losing on time.
It's that trade-off. It's that trade-off
exactly.
that you have to make in that split-second decision. Yeah.
Sorry for putting you on blast, Daryl. I am going to send Daryl this podcast and show him that we were talking about it. But so okay, like obviously you poked at a huge topic when it comes to whatever it is, there's a passing of the baton that is happening, whether the generations before it want it or not. And that has been happening forever in all industries and in all sports and in all games. But now we live in a world where it feels like that process was accelerated and then challenged almost dogmatically, because you had this religious approach from the intuitive, way all kind of games or sports were tackled, versus the data-driven, objective truth, like it or not. You might not want to have this conversation because it's uncomfortable for you, but the data bears out, right? Whatever, right? And then really where it gets tricky is the middle ground, the gray areas where both, no matter how great the models might be, how incredible the data might be informing us too, right? When it comes to the information we have being very complete, but maybe not perfect still in a lot of games, even with chess computers, versus the intuitive approach, where you get really fun conversations is in the gray area, right? Where there is still some debate in terms of what the right approach might be, because we haven't fully solved it yet. And I think that's already a fascinating part of chess, because it's a game of complete information, unlike poker. 64 squares, the defined sets and geometry of how the pieces can navigate their way across the board is in place, and it cannot change. There is no luck. Yet we have not solved the game. Even the deepest machine learning neural nets, Google's DeepMind, AlphaZero, and the entire evolution that has come to chess computers, we have still not solved the game. Maybe it's closer, but it's crazy when you think about it like that, right? So let's see. Like I said, you poked on a big topic, and you guys are going to have to be like, all right, Danny, that's a natural stopping point, because this is something that
no, keep going.
Is fascinating.
Yeah.
I also, Danny, would like to hop in and just say that you're touching on something that rings very true to me. Again, from a poker background, my older brother, who got me into poker, something he taught me and a number of other really analytically inclined people taught me, is that the value of like the data and the analytics isn't so much just mimicking it 100%. It's to give yourself a foundation to deviate from, or to maybe exploit. Like if you're trying to exploit an opponent in chess, you still need that analytically based foundation so that you know what the optimal move is in a game theory sense, like what a GTO optimal.
I'm glad you said that, because I'll share a fun conversation that you'll appreciate. I was talking about this subject of computer preparation at home, how the engines affect not just the analysis brought to the board by a top grandmaster, but then the decisions they make based on what their opponent does, whatever, right? With Fabiano Caruana, considered by many maybe to be the best player of his generation after Magnus Carlsen. Hikaru Nakamura might have something to say about that. There's a lot of things to debate there, but we were talking about Magnus specifically because one of the things that became the hallmark of Magnus Carlsen's dominance over the last couple decades was that his ability to take his opponents into areas where they were uncomfortable, into the deep, dark woods where it looked like both players from a very early stage were on their own. Meaning opening prep by the engines was not as effective against Magnus Carlsen because of his ability to navigate the subtle transpositions, the little tricky move orders, and ultimately arrive at an original position because he was so confident in his ability to outplay people if he could get there, if he knew he wasn't playing against their preparation from home. But what Fabiano said in a conversation, Geoff, was it takes a very well-prepared player to make it look like there's no preparation affecting the game. And that statement says it all, right? The Magnus Carlsen approach in some ways was so deep and so influenced with an incredible team he had by the neural nets at times, by such phenomenal computer preparation, not because he was trying to beat people in 37 moves of Najdorf Sicilian theory, which for those who don't speak chess is a very sharp opening. Najdorf Sicilian is like one where one false step and you get crushed by someone's prep at home. So you almost don't want to go into that unless you are super deeply prepared. He wasn't doing that. He was actually getting what looked to be almost a dubious approach in the opening, often, yet outplaying people from those positions. But to do that at a high level, to choose something that's sort of second best, if you will, takes such a deep understanding of the opening prep to do that safely, that it's kind of incredible. So I love that point, Geoff, that data informed versus data driven is sometimes the most effective strategy. And I don't know, I can't speak to the NBA coaches or the real-time decisions you have to make, but I think it's irresponsible at this day and age, I think, in any industry to not be data informed and influenced based on what we are able to accomplish at home in preparation at scale through the aggregate to lean on the Moneyball meme, right? But it doesn't mean that every decision can be data driven. It's not always possible, right? There are moments where you are making a decision based on the general direction of the game. And I think that Daryl might even have something to say about that. I mean, there's so many things we could debate.
It's basically like you're saying, I mean, what you're saying, essentially you need to know the main line of the theory and the sidelines to be able to safely deviate from them without getting crushed by
100%.
someone knowing those other lines. And you'd be like, oops, I walked my way into this and I didn't mean to.
And I don't know what the NBA comparison is that. Because like,
I was going to make one. Yeah. So I think real quick, I think an NBA comparison is where how analytics has basically taught us the value of the different types of shots. And so primarily, you know, the value of the part of the court you take shots from. And so that has made us kind of this, I don't know, homogeneous, like everybody's taking threes and layups, basically. That's what you want to get to. You take threes and layups, but like maybe that informs like where the value plays are, but you have to know that and understand that to know when there's the value play is actually to take a mid-range shot, because the balance has become so warped that now this shot is even more valuable in certain contexts and situations. So that could be some analogous pathway when you're looking at the NBA, where it's like, when do I deviate from what the most valuable thing is in an objective sense? And being able to know that requires you to know which the most valuable shots are, to know when it's appropriate to deviate, I guess.
Yeah. And also just, you know, fans watching the NBA, like you have people who will scoff at using like data and analytics, you know, and they'll say like, oh, like screw the analytics, you know, like I know what I'm watching. I trust the eye test. And it's like, okay, but like, we all watch the NBA. We all watch it from our own perspectives. It's kind of dismissive to just be like, not only is my watching the game that much better than yours, but it's also better than it combined with the analytics. So like there's a perspective that the people who know how to deviate from when the imperfect metrics aren't perfectly applicable probably have a superior perspective to people who are just like, nah, ignore them entirely, you know, like maybe not superior. That sounds condescending, I
think that's totally true. And I would also argue, Geoff, that type of fan is actually a dying breed anyway. I can speak. I have two teenage boys who I think represent what the NBA has done very well and represent the future type of fan, which is the modern day fan actually wants to watch the game and engage in debates about who the GOAT is between LeBron and Jordan while watching a random game between the Warriors and the Sun. They actually want to have, I mean, I watch my sons, it's second screen watching. They're literally watching the stats in the app or some sort of, you know, short form content about the game they're watching to allow them to debate some sort of play or whatever. Like the modern day fan, I would argue, like, and I think the NBA has done a pretty good job of leaning into the idea that, well, I mean, okay, I don't know. I mean, maybe they can do different things when it comes to how they package and present their content across all of the short form verticals, to speak the language of our online industry, right? But basically, I would say that I observe a lot of fans who enjoy the sabermetrics debates and the advanced analytics discussions while watching a game, even if the discussion they're having isn't even like focused on the game. It's like this, I don't know what it is. It's like super nerd viewing, I guess. That's what they want, right? They want to engage in that way. But I don't know. Back to what you're saying about the computers. This is, yeah, we have talked about this topic at Sloan through more lens than one over the last 5 years or so. I think that it's interesting to see what chess does as an industry in terms of not just embracing complete information, because back to what I was saying is other industries, I think, do have more gray area. I made that metaphor of we have the completely data-driven, 100% correct, complete information. You're a fool not to trust it. Completely intuitive. Leave me alone. I want to, ignorance is bliss. Take your data and you know what with it, right? The gray areas where the fascinating conversations happen, in my opinion, and where the critical decisions are made by GMs, by coaches, by players, based on whatever's happening. And back to that point, I think chess probably operates as an industry closer to the complete information side than other industries do, because we've had no choice, because our artificially intelligent overlords arrived 3 decades ago before it arrived for all of you, right? And so we've had to embrace it. And I think the challenge of that has actually been fascinating, both in terms of how we present content, how we still are able to lean into the drama of a moment and the pressure that the humans are facing about the critical decisions in front of them, knowing that we have the complete information, whether they choose the right one or not, right? There's been an art to that and a dance to that in terms of how we've done it to not make it just feel boring, right? And then there's also this idea that even with our artificially intelligent overlords being the gods of chess, there are still really interesting conversations about the evolution of that because they haven't solved it yet. And my brain is literally jumping because there's so many things on this topic. There have been big leaps. AlphaZero was a big one a few years ago, the Google DeepMind project. Before that, there were other leaps in terms of when the computer's understanding changed. And so there's been an evolution of how we treated those computers, where we said, like, all right, yes, it knows this, it knows that there's a blunder, but it doesn't understand this. And we make that entertaining, or we focus on that from an educational perspective so that we're still leaning into what the viewers can learn. But then as that has become more difficult, as the computers are just better at everything, they're better at positional chess, abstract thinking, they're better at, of course, just busting your ass with some concrete, 100 move combination you couldn't see. We've had to do a lot of different things in terms of how we talk about the game. And I guess I'll just shut up there because maybe there's other questions or comments on where you want to take that conversation. But
I would just love for you to give like an example, because to me, and I think, I just, XJ knows a ton about chess. I don't know a lot about chess, but to me, I think you'd agree that chess is probably more solved than, we brought up poker, we brought up basketball. I know you're saying it's not completely solved, but on a relative basis, it's probably more solved in the sense of you have these computers, you can run these sims. It's more binary. If somebody makes a move, you can just be like, oh, well, that was the wrong move. How do you create content? How do you create discussion around largely solved questions? Like in the NBA, if Klay Thompson was just signed by the Mavericks, there's no way of objectively answering the question of if that was the right decision by the Mavericks, where we can do our best to deduce it. But at the end of the day, everybody's opinion is valid, and it's a very subjective question. Whereas, and I could be totally ignorant here and just talking out of my ass, it feels like to me as an outsider, if somebody, makes an opening move, if I just sat down, in my computer, never having played chess before, and I made an opening move, you could just laugh and be like, yeah, you're objectively wrong. I know that's wrong. And it would take you 15 seconds to explain it. So Can you just expand a little bit on how you create content and what in your opinion makes it so interesting?
I almost want to ask XJ. He says he watches and he's a fan. Maybe we're disappointing him. What makes it interesting for him before I give an answer? Because, I live in this world for better or worse, right? And I think we've done a pretty good job both acknowledging the elephant in a room and wrapping new ribbons around it. And I think that some of the challenges we faced early on in terms of just making chess feel fun and interesting and accessible and not like, this is too hard for me, I'm not smart enough to play chess. We have an enemy when it comes to growing the game of chess. You know what the enemy is? Chess. Chess is the enemy of growing the game of chess because chess is hard. The learning curve is steep, at least at scale. And unfortunately, it's also tied to how people feel about their own intelligence. They might not say it, but they feel like if they lose, I'm not smart enough for this game, right? And they don't like that feeling. And we have done so many things to try to not only embrace that chess is a journey to get better and we're all on it together, no matter how good you are, including the best players in the world. Look, they're not even as good as the computers. Some computers sometimes help us with that. But there's also a lot of other things we've had to do from a content point of view in terms of wrapping a ribbon around it. So I'm going to give more to it, but I want to hear what XJ says about maybe some of the things he likes that we do when it comes to this, because you say you watch our show. So I want to know, please.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that make it interesting to me. I mean, to me, I think, well, one, kind of the comparison that Geoff, that you were making about kind of making a random move in the opening, that would be like more the equivalent of like taking a half court shot, with 23 seconds left on the clock. It's like, there are some plays that's just like, okay, obviously you should never do that, right. But at the same time, I think what makes it interesting to me is, and I feel like chess is moving in this direction more and more, is the time controls, right? So the longer you have, the more easy it is for a player, a GM level or even an I said even an IM. I'm sorry, Danny. I didn't mean it that way.
Yeah, hey, look down on me, please. It's okay.
But a master level player, the more time they have, the more likely they are to be able to figure out what the objectively correct move is in a particular position.
Yeah.
But when you add the time controls, nobody's sitting there being able to figure things out. You got to use your intuition. You got to use your reflexes. You got to come up with this trade-off, right? Of like, I could spend more time and get a better move, or I could just save my time and make the move that I think is probably the best based on the few seconds I've looked at this position. And that makes things really interesting to me. I think the other fact is that like I started playing chess young. Like I learned in elementary school, due to, they had the chess in the schools program. I don't know if they still are doing it, but they had that.
Chess in the schools is an amazing program and still big, in New York. And
yeah,
I don't know how many schools they're in, but they're everywhere.
So I learned it at my elementary school, PS 138 in the Bronx, and I got super into it. And just knowing it, at a young age kind of puts you in a different situation. I feel like you get used to some of the patterns younger when your brain's more malleable, right? And then so you kind of get used to that. And then when you see it when you're older, you're like, I remember this. This feels right. So there's some of that. But I feel like broadcasting is huge. And this is something I wanted to talk to you specifically about, Danny. Obviously, you kind of, I've made this joke, but I really mean it. You being the voice of chess, kind of like the Mike Breen of chess, so to speak. I think broadcasting is really important, more important in chess even than it is in other sports like basketball and the NFL, because broadcasters not only have to kind of give the play-by-play, they have to fill a lot of time in terms of what the players are doing, what they're thinking, what the possible moves, the moves they may be considering. They have to make it entertaining. They have to teach the game at the same time. There's so many things. There's so many responsibilities that the broadcasters have. And I feel like that really brings along the audience to make it engaging, entertaining, informational, all those things all at the same time. And that's something that chess.com does extremely well. You, Danny, Robert Hess. I love Robert Hess doing any broadcast. Naroditsky is awesome. Jen Shahadi, all of those people, like really being able to teach the game and make it interesting at the same time. I think that's what brings people in who really don't know what's going on, but could easily be entertained and it be explained to them what's going on as they're watching. So to me, those are a few things.
I love that. I can expand a little bit on the broadcasting element if you guys want. I think that's an interesting topic and probably goes back to Jeff's question. So forgive me for 30 seconds. I'm going to hop on a soapbox and talk a little bit about the evolution of broadcasting content. Actually, I think as it applies to like any space, because I've had a lot of these conversations, actually a lot of conversations at Sloan where we end up getting fun crossovers with people who are in the sports world, who are fans of chess. And these types of conversations come up organically. And what I'll say is one of the things that I've appreciated about conversations with people who do broadcasting in other sports is that they actually have been super complimentary of the things we've done. And part of the reason is because of the evolution of what happened in the broadcasting space in other sports that chess was not able to reap the benefits of. And here's what I'm getting to. If we talk about broadcasting as an industry, the evolution of the medium that is television was the next step from radio. What was radio? Radio was literally describing something as the broadcaster on site at a sporting event that you could see that other people could not. So let's talk about that. What did that mean? It meant your job was to literally just describe what you saw because other people can see it, right? So radio broadcasting set in direction. They set in motion the entire, like not just tone, approach, strategy, everything that was deemed a successful broadcast was actually born out of radio and the evolution of radio. And what that means is they were literally just describing what they saw for the people who weren't able to see it for themselves. And then even when TV came along, all the best broadcasters, all the best voices, what were they doing? If just look back at early TV, they were literally just describing what they saw and reacting along with the viewer at home. They weren't necessarily adding any value to what they were seeing. There was no context. There wasn't even pressure on the greatest broadcasters of the time to give insight anecdotes or to describe not just why the dunk happened, but the pick and roll that happened right before it because the defense didn't rotate, and that actually opened up the opportunity right on the left wing. And so if you back up, broadcasting in the traditional sports world, and again, I can say this, people at Sloan have said this, Daryl himself has said this, developed very lazy habits. There was not an expectation for them to give information that the fan at home desired because no one really expected it. This was just how it had been, literally for decades and decades. chess as an entity was considered for so long boring, slow, inaccessible, too hard to understand. And okay, I can tune in for 5 seconds and appreciate that these are two intellectually elite human beings, Bobby Fischer and Boris Spassky, going like this, but I don't know what the fuck is going on here. And do I even really care? Right. So, but we were not okay with that. In fact, it was not only something that I always dreamed about doing as a kid. As a kid, I actually, my earliest dreams, guys, would actually be an actor and a sports center anchor. That's a whole other story I'll talk about later. But as we sort of accidentally fell into this position as the grateful and sort of lucky leaders of the entire chess world, to be honest, when it came to how we were going to present chess to a younger generation, how we were going to grow the audience and expand the demos, we had a bottom line reason to be good at it. We had to figure out how we were going to make the game accessible, right? It wasn't just altruistic. It was a selfish business interest, right? Let's be honest. But also it didn't mean we didn't have to be very good at it and be both genuine and authentic to the traditional community, to not disrespect how hard chess is and how fascinating these problems that are a massive intellectual puzzle to solve, but also make sure people didn't feel gatekept or kept out of the big moments, right? So we actually leaned in very hard to what I would say was edutainment. We never had the luxury of being lazy. We always had to be focused on, not just was that a really cool move and hard to understand by the grandmasters watching, but let me quickly give you the basic pattern therein that you can take home and put in your pocket. I would call it a knowledge nugget. I just made up that term early on. Like, here's a knowledge nugget for you. And I would joke about it. Like, hey, put that in your pocket. That's a pattern that is the basic principle of what Magnus Carlsen is executing on. We'll see what happens in a few moves from now. What people feel in that moment is, oh, intrigued by what Magnus sees that I don't see a few moves from now. Now I actually want to stick around. And holy shit, I just learned something. What is going on here, right? So we actually had this approach to making chess, like I said, I've used the word many times now, accessible, relatable, something that felt like people were getting value while also no longer being turned off by the intellectually elite people who knew something they didn't, right? And that was like, that example of how we did it, Geoff, actually made it probably easier for us to embrace the complete information of the engines, because we had already been packaging the elephant in the room with that ribbon to say, hey, yeah, this is hard. And chess is a difficult game that people spend lifetimes trying to master, and twist ending, they never will, right? But also it's super fun. It's a lot easier to get into it than you think. The patterns, when you start learning how to spot them, are not only rewarding, it's good dopamine, not instant gratification, shut down your frontal lobe dopamine, right? This is good stuff. And we were already leaning into that when the computers came along. So the idea of saying, hey, Magnus is thinking about the kingside attack here. What he doesn't see is that the computer, there's a really tricky combination to win a pawn on the queen side. We actually were able to lean into, that's a very anti-human approach to the position. Will Magnus find it? And then as the players started having their approach to the game influenced by the computers, they started finding those tactics, and it was an amazing experience over the last 10 years, because you could be like, oh my God, look at this generation of human beings. They're no longer fighting this sort of anti-human intuitive way to play chess. They've embraced it, and the game is being played at a more accurate level than it ever has been in history. Yeah, we still get blunders in these fast time controls, as XJ said, and we have leaned into that because people do love train wrecks, admit it or not, right? They love seeing blunders. They love seeing brilliancies and bad moves. But we were able to do both. We were able to kind of have our cake and eat it too by changing the formats and making it harder on the players, increase the sporting elements of stress, over the board decision-making. Intuition is more challenged when you don't have a lot of time to think. But we also weren't turning our back on the point that computers, they did know the answer. In fact, it's even educational for us to always kind of know what it is, what the answer in the back of the math book is. But that doesn't mean that the sporting element of what we're watching right now is any less fascinating. And so I guess that was a long tangent, I'm sorry, but I think it's relevant to appreciate that in some ways, and I'll say this because I was told this by a broadcaster who will go unnamed in another sport who watches us, and said, like, he actually thinks that chess broadcasting is like one of the hardest jobs in the world because of what XJ said. But also we've done a very good job of leaning in to the edutainment. Now you watch Jeff Van Gundy, Mark Jackson, and Mike Breen, and they actually do this all the time now. Now people want that. They love the mini breakdown of actually show me not just the dunk anymore. People aren't just wanting the highlight. They want to understand how the defense broke down and what that pattern might be that the coach is going to continue to try to exploit until the Sixers stop it. or whatever, right? I think now people are looking for those edutaining aspects, and chess has always had to do that. So I'll shut up there.
But I feel like that was such a good explanation. And I think the last thing you said is such a good transition, because I actually don't think NBA fans are fully there yet.
Okay.
Because, and I hope that you're right. I hope they do get there, because the ESPN broadcast just went from Van Gundy and Jackson, and people were like, oh, Van Gundy and Jackson, they're fun. They're TV personalities, but they're kind of behind the times when it comes to NBA breakdowns. They replaced them with Doris Burke and JJ Redick, who are, I'm not going to say they're the most analytically inclined, but probably two of the more analytically inclined national TV broadcasters we've ever seen.
Yep.
And people are now complaining that's too boring. They're not enough They're not enough TV personalities, And so the term you coined there, edutainment. Yeah, that's so well put. And I think XJ and I are kind of navigating that in the podcast world. You see all these podcasts. What makes, covering the NBA, what truly are people looking for? Are they looking to have their intuition reinforced? Are they looking to learn with an open mind? I don't know, XJ, if you want to pop in here, but I do feel like the people who are really interested in chess, there may be a stronger correlation to having an open mind and wanting that than an NBA fan. Maybe not. I think is that wrong?
I think a slight difference between the games is that kind of the X and O's aspect of basketball is the analytical part of chess, right? That's the 1-to-1. And then the analytical part of basketball is like a different thing. So what Danny was saying I think is right with regard to wanting to hear like Jeff Van Gundy maybe break down like the pick and roll or something like that, or different kinds of X and O's concepts maybe here and there. But then when you take it the step further and then you bring into this like analytical bend to it, that's when I think the fans start to complain and say, it's kind of boring. But in chess, there's no middle ground. It's like, here's what the engine says. Here's like the objective correct moves to do. And we're going to teach you about this and why. And here's what the players are thinking intuitively based on the limitations of their brain to kind of analyze the position and come up with possible moves to make. And those are the two things that you're talking about. Whereas in basketball, it's almost like there's three things you could talk about. You can talk about the X's and O's, what coaches would do in the certain circumstances. And I think people find that sort of interesting and like have started to find it more and more interesting. But then when you go the step further and you're like, strategically, here's like kind of like the game theory optimal of what a team should do in this crunch time situation with the score within this range. Here's how they should make their shot selection based on they should take X number of threes. They should foul at this appropriate time. Like, I think people find that stuff a little less interesting. So I think there's 3 dimensions in basketball, whereas there's sort of only 2 in chess. If I'm kind of conceptualizing this right. I don't know what you think about that, Danny.
Well, I think it's interesting because really, if we were just to simplify what the third element is, it's kind of the middleman of the coach, because there's like what the fans see, what the players are going to do. And then there's like this middle person who can affect whether the optimal approach based on the data is going to be taken or not. And so you do have a decision to make in terms of diving into that from a content perspective. But as I hear you guys talk about, I mean, here's the truth, though. We're kind of coming at this from opposite ends of the spectrum, right? Because in some ways, basketball, and you guys could say whether I'm wrong or not, but I would argue that basketball, if I took someone who knows nothing about any of the games I'm about to mention, the games or sports, put them in a bar, and there were 5 monitors on, and you guys know where I'm going with this.
They'd watch basketball.
There was basketball, baseball, football, NFL football, soccer, and chess, right? Not even which one they would choose to watch. Which one within the first 30 seconds are they able to understand the goal of the game? Like, it's not even debatable that basketball to me is easier, because the ball goes in the hoop and they see that and they see a number change. Like, literally imagine Alien. Ball goes across the court, goes in the hoop, and they see a number change. They go, oh, okay, that's the goal of the game, right? With NFL, with baseball, I mean, literally, I still can't explain baseball to my daughters. Honestly, it's and my boys grew up playing baseball. Otherwise they might not understand it, right? And so it's fascinating. And the same with NFL. The same, it's kind of tricky to break down the rules of the first down. Wait, how many downs you get? You get what I'm saying, right? So basketball not only had the luxury of being a little bit lazier in terms of its approach to the embracing of data from a content perspective, regardless of what Daryl was trying to do, or coaches who were more forward thinking on the competitive advantages therein. I think there were some who were really doing it. You hear people talk about how they probably should have embraced it even earlier. I mean, Mike D'Antoni now reflects on the years with the Suns. By the way, my oldest son's name is Nash, to answer your question on how big of a Suns fan I was. So, by the way, Nash is a pretty cute name for a first name, right? You got to admit. So my oldest son his name is Nash.
I would have assumed it was like based on Nash theory, like, you know, like okay. the father of GTO. So that's cool. Yeah. Steve Nash. It's like a double thing.
So Steve Nash was a hero for me. I mean, I was watching the Suns and you know, that entire team get robbed every year by the Spurs and David Stern. I won't go into that right now. Anyway, the idea that some of the GMs and coaches were maybe ahead of the game in terms of embracing shot selection, more threes, whatever. But in terms of the content, the NBA has the most accessible, I think, audience in the world in terms of just, you know, barrier to entry. And so I would say, I don't know. I mean, part of me wonders if, like, maybe most of the audience is speaking to the fact that they actually don't need Doris Burke and JJ Redick to enjoy the game that they've always watched. I don't know. Maybe the part of it simple is actually an audience that is there. And you guys should be leaning harder into the things that the NFL is doing for those who want it. Like, you guys should have a show, right? A Manning cast, right? Because the audience who wants the breakdown within the breakdown within the breakdown is always going to be smaller than the audience who just wants to sit and be entertained. I mean, yep. I think that this is true. So imagine our position. We're in a tough uphill battle because that small sliver is our only audience, yeah. Right? We're trying to grow and make chess more accessible to the large masses. The NBA is spoiled for choice, in my opinion, in terms of how to approach this from a content strategy point of view. I think I've been surprised that they haven't leaned in more into like the Manning cast thing. They're now doing this stuff with Kevin Hart, and I think it is cool to have a bit of a your hang out with your friends vibe and watch a game. But it's still not the same as like what you get into when you see the Manning brothers break down, you know, the bad footwork by an offensive lineman, right? And what actually happened when the pocket collapsed, right? That's like a fascinating thing to see. So I guess where I'm going with that is I respect and appreciate that, especially knowing who you guys are. I'm on the, you know, Hot Hand Theory podcast, and your world that you live in and how fun this is, and that you guys are obviously serving an audience. It's a very big one that cares about this. We have a big audience too, I guess, if we want to say that, but our audience isn't even close to the biggest audience that is the NBA. Maybe they don't really have a content packaging problem from that point of view. And instead of trying to fix what wasn't broken about the mainstream thing, they should have leaned into JJ Redick and Doris Burke having their own stream and having their own show that actually reached that audience instead of fucking with something people loved. Right. And I could, if I was in the business shoes and replaying what they did with that, I could see that. I don't know how I would approach that or what I would do now, having learned the reaction of our most important demographics. Right. So it's, you know, it's a good problem to have that the NBA is faced with. And I'll leave it at that.
There are like watch alongs. I know that's not exactly what you were going for, but like to your point about there's, you know, a small little audience that's looking for, you know, especially fans of a team. If you're a Knicks fan and you're like, I just want to hear people who care about the Knicks talk about the Knicks. I don't want to hear these national broadcasters be objective. You know, what's it called? Actually, you were on that funny one. What's the thing you did for KFS for game
playback?
5? Yeah, playback. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So so like basically like XJ and a couple other guys got on and people watched him and then watched the game. And they were like analyzing it and reacting to it as fans. And in this particular game, the Knicks had an all-time collapse. So we got to see XJ be emotional for the first time in his entire life. So
broke me out of my robotic character. It's really unfortunate that happened. I think this is such a fascinating conversation to me. I think to kind of take it in a little bit of a detour, but a similar kind of ballpark range direction. Like I'm thinking, so you mentioned trying to be respectful to kind of the traditional play in chess and kind of still growing the game, making it entertaining. to me, when you were talking about like you go to a bar, all these sports are on the TV, which one are you going to be able to intuitively follow the most? And it might be basketball because, you know, the score, the score changes. So that dynamicism is created through like scoring rates, but also like the speed with which they play. They fly up and down the court. There's just much more movement. It's more eye-catching to just from a visceral standpoint. I also do graphic design, and so I think a lot about visual elements and best practices, and that eye-catchiness of just like your eyes kind of drawn to it much more than football. You know, there's a play that happens, it's really exciting and engaging, and then there's nothing that happens for like a minute after that. Or baseball,
what are they doing?
You know?
They're standing around. Are they talking in a circle? Did somebody do something wrong? Is somebody like literally like these are conversations?
Danny, I've taken a lot of heat for this, but I've talked about how I think that football is like an innately boring sport. Like I like it, and I'm a football fan. I watch every game, but I think it's like objectively more boring than basketball because it's just less happening all the time.
XJ and I started talking like a year ago, and that was like literally one of the first conversations I saw him having on the timeline was like, guys, football sucks. And like we had just like started talking, and I texted him on the side. I was like, dude, what are you talking about? Football is awesome. Like I'm into like the gambling aspect of it, like DFS, and like, you know, Sundays are like the day I look forward to in the fall. And then like that week there was a Monday night game, and I was like, man, you're kind of right. Like this does suck. And he's just fully converted me to
he ruined you.
but I guess what I'm getting at with this is that basketball is one of the most popular sports in the world. And I think it is inherently interesting because of that dynamic play. And there's constantly stuff going on. It's really fast paced. Basketball is fast. But imagine like a slow basketball. Imagine the court being bigger and there being like a 40-second shot clock or a minute shot clock, and there's no, you know, like 3 seconds in the paint or whatever. And people are passing it around the key, and they just stand with the ball for a while. They kind of hold it. They survey. You know, they throw it down low. This guy holds it for a while. He throws it back out. That would be a lot less engaging. And so to me, it's like
hence the shot clock.
Hence
right?
the shot
that's
clock.
That's how it used to be 50 years ago. Exactly. So
right. And so to me, it's like, the corollary being in chess, speed chess, right? Like obviously you have the speed chess championship and other speed events, but like that to me is almost inherently more engaging than slower chess where obviously there's a lot you can do with it. You have more time to kind of do these breakdowns and you know, the FIDE World Chess Championship the coverage is my favorite, but like I love chess, you know, to a newcomer, it's like, you want to see things go. You want to see pieces move, right? Just like you want to see players move. You want to see the ball move. You want to see pieces move. And so when you're just seeing two guys you mentioned, you're just seeing two guys sitting there thinking and holding their heads. That's not as inherently engaging, in my opinion. And I feel like I feel like just the chess world is moving towards speed chess, and how can you still be respectful towards the kind of traditional modes of play while still moving in that direction if it's able to expand the sport a lot more quickly due to like the innate interest of that speed aspect.
You touched on a lot there. You made me think of a few things that we've done as a company, right? In terms of our broader strategy of how to present chess, how to grow the game, how to reach new audiences, and how to again serve the authentic, most genuine, most committed part of the community along the way. And so let me just say, I'm going to back up my thoughts in reverse order. Hopefully I don't forget any. First of all, what you talked about with football being boring and or basketball, like what if it was slow? But regardless of that, one of the things that those two sports actually have going for it that baseball doesn't is something Robert Hess and I have talked a lot about, which is instant offense becoming instant defense. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because I think one of the problems with baseball is you lack the feeling that you can't turn away. In those games, you can't turn away because you might miss something that matters. You might miss an interception, let alone a pick six. You might miss like a high-flying dunk. And the reason I'm getting to that is not just to pick on baseball. But I think it is interesting. I think it is an issue that they will face continuously going forward because, yes, there's like a home run that could be caught with a diving save, but it's still not the same stakes as
it can't really cost a mistake
or
can't really cost you.
Exactly. You can't lose the game in the moment of having a conversation with your friend. So baseball, leans into the social aspects of the game. It is a bit more like golf in that it's sort of second monitor watching a little, but okay, we can talk about that later in terms of, because we do think a lot about that. There are different ways to grow your audience. There is like ACCV. There's the actual concurrent viewership you have. There's actively engaged viewership, those in chat. There's ways that you can, monitor the next action they take, or at least you hope to inspire them to play chess. And we have an actual funnel based on the consumer business that pays the bills at chess.com, the subscriptions. But I think all industries are thinking about this to a certain degree. What I want to come back to is not just was I picking on baseball with that theory that what football and basketball have going for it, especially, is that offense becomes instant and actually the stakes are high defense, right? And that creates FOMO watching, fear of missing out. And that creates moments that matter. And the reason I say I've coined this phrase with my team, which is that really what you are getting when you tune into a live event is the experience that you're a part of something that might never happen again. Otherwise, we actually live in a world where people can get the best moments of a game on fucking TikTok later, right? I mean, there's a reason every one of these Tonight shows is built on the idea. Look at how they build the broader programming. It's a 30-minute show or 60-minute show that no one watches. So each segment is 2 minutes because they know they're putting it on YouTube and the other short form verticals to try to grow their audience, right? The brand itself is taking a larger strategy toward growing their demo besides just the traditional metric of how many people are watching in real time, right? But why do people tune in real time? Because they're afraid they might miss something that they might never see again. That's what sports will always have going for it. And that's what those two sports have going for it more than any other. And we have tried to lean into that with chess because building on my theory of how do you create moments that matter, you have to also create instant context so that people are gripped. And so one of the things we've been doing with our broadcast, and I watch a lot of our broadcasts without sound for this, because one of the KPIs I created a few years ago for our team was called Chess with No Sound. I wanted to tune in and be able to enjoy one of our shows without listening to the commentators. And that was a very difficult thing to do because we needed to lean in heavily to the edutainment strategy of commentary. I think we've done a good job with it. Again, I already gave my theories on that because we were forced to do it. So I think we did a good job, I think. But now we're really trying to evolve into the sports broadcasting, sports bar world by saying you could tune into this and within the best versions of who we are without changing what chess is, you get that there's something important happening. So how have we done that? We have really up close and personal cameras of the players in face, so you can get emotional reactions. We also have commentators on camera a lot more than traditional sports do, because the commentators, you've seen me and Hess, right, XJ? Like, we fall out of our chair, like, OMG, like, oh, so at least because you feel like you're having an experience with us, even if you might not get what's going on with the chess, you're like, oh my God, these guys are losing their mind, right? So we've leaned more into facial expressions of the commentators, up close and personal facial expressions of the players that other games can't necessarily deliver. We've leaned into the technology of how we bring out the knowledge of the engine in a way that adds, like, now you see on the board when a blunder is made, it shows like a little glyph, right? Now that technology has been hard to master. We've been criticized for it by the traditional community. Every time the engine isn't exactly right, they're like, oh, chess.com's ruining the game again. But really our goal is to do something that's very hard, which is help people be able to watch a chess game. The eval bar does a good job, right? So at least if someone blunders and it shoots up, everyone goes, and you go, oh my God, black went from winning to now white's winning, right? And so those elements, glyphs on the board to show the quality of the move, the eval bar, the facial expressions, and scoreboards in some ways like a baseball sort of box score to show people a little bit of how we got here. And then what the Speed Chess Championship has done better than any other event, I think, and Magnus thinks so, Hikaru thinks so. I think that from a future potential perspective, by the way, we're going to test this theory in Paris in September. There's going to be our first ever live SCC. We can't wait for it, like with live fans. The idea that we have a format that has a shot clock. So not just do the players play and all the elements I talked about, and you see the score of the match, but there's a clock ticking down the whole time. So you have this element of whoever has the most points at the end of that timer running out wins the match. So for the first time, instead of only having the clocks between the players, which is the thing they hit per move, you have almost a mutual enemy. You have this clock that both players are fighting against, right? That element, I think, has brought, like I said, back to my whole rant, what is it? FOMO watching. You have to inspire fear of missing out watching. Otherwise, your event doesn't matter. And from that perspective, especially with the evolution of content, making the best moments of the game more accessible than ever later, you better lean into better FOMO watching. Otherwise, you will not be able to grow your audience or even judge, the ACCV as a metric that matters to you, because your audience is going to dwindle because they can get the best parts of it somewhere else. So there's other things too we could talk about. Stories. make people emotionally invested in the players. Chess needs to do better with that. We're continuing to do it, right? I think the stats can do that. The data of a game within a game. What can you tell people is at stake beyond just the game they're playing, right? So stories and stakes are other things, but I think chess with no sound has been a big goal for us, and leaning into the FOMO aspects of don't look away. You might miss something that really comes out in the Speed Chess Championship because of the fast time control and the score. Those are really big things that we've tried to do, and I think you have to do. So I don't know. Did I say any? Hopefully that helped. I don't know.
This could be a really dumb question. So, feel free to laugh at me if it's a dumb question. But does chess have like a running win probability calculator? Like
Yes.
if I was to,
he leaned into that.
I actually, real quick, just to interject, because you went in the exact direction, Geoff. This is why we do a pod together, by the way, Danny, because we just think in a very similar way. So I want you to get to your question, but before I lose this one, because it exactly ties to what Danny was just talking about. So you all show the chess eval bar during the games, typically when you're broadcasting. And so we know who in an objective sense is winning or losing in a live sense.
We do, but the players don't. Yes.
But the players don't. Right. The commentators and the audience knows, but the players don't. So I've thought about this before, but like a win probability bar next to the game live during basketball, I feel like no one would like that. I don't know if you agree with this, Geoff. I feel like everybody would hate that universally. I'm not sure if, maybe over some time they would get used to it and then start to find it interesting. But how do you make that decision of having the eval bar versus not having it? And like, how do audiences, because I know you deep dive into like all the data, qualitative data on understanding what people care about. How do you make the decision that, yeah, we'll have the eval bar? Because I've thought about this. I would like to see a win probability bar in basketball. I would want to see, this team has a 95% chance of winning, and that will kind of dictate to me like my investment in that game. If it's like really close and going back and forth, that adds to the excitement of that game. But I don't.
You'd want to see a good one.
Yeah, you'd want to see.
That's the tangible difference.
I think Geoff is nailing it. Yeah, that's the problem. Is that
with chess being more solved? That's why it would interest me, because I don't know much about chess, but I feel like if I was watching Danny call a chess match, announce a chess match, and he was like, okay, if Magnus moves the knight here, he's going to have a 58% chance to win the match. But if he moves the pawn here, it only gives him a 54. I'm making that up. That could be bullshit, but I'm just making a random example. I, as someone who doesn't know much about chess, I could at least start to like practically try to figure out why move X is better than move Y. And because it's a more solved sport, it's a more fixed sport, I could trust that the data is complete. I open up ESPN for a basketball game and they have their stupid win probability calculator. I know that's not good. I know that they would never, ever fade. They would never, ever let me bet against their win probability because it's just not even close. And I think with basketball being less solved, you would just be like, okay, that doesn't really mean anything. You would just be like annoyed looking at it half the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think, I don't know, this will sound weird. I think you guys are like the opposite audience that the NBA cares about, right? And I think that,
that's not weird at all. You're 100% right.
Hey, let's get real. You guys like getting real. So as I'm hearing you guys talk and I'm unpacking this and I'm thinking about it with like my business hat on, what I would say is this: like, first of all, the NBA doesn't have the problem chess does. Like, again, we have a game that people tune in to watch and they don't understand what is going on, and it makes it less fun to watch and inaccessible. So the eval bar, regardless of how the traditional community feels about it, the eval and most of the traditional community, while they hated it and fought us at first, has now come to embrace it because, like it or not, they all wanted to pretend they were smarter than they were, because a lot of people liked thinking they're smart and that they knew what the computer thought, and they didn't. And they actually love that the engine is helping to guide the drama of the moment, because without the eval bar, Magnus might make a move and you might not even appreciate that the drama just changed, that the win probability just went from 95% to 2%. So it's actually a requirement because of how difficult chess is to understand, or at least to make accessible for the large audiences. That's the truth. Basketball is so easy to understand what's going on in terms of who's winning on this. Like, literally my 2-year-old, I don't have a 2-year-old anymore, but like, it's not hard to figure out who's winning. So you don't have an audience problem from an accessibility standpoint. There are other audience problems for the NBA, right? There are other things if we were to talk about, but that's a different podcast in terms of like how they tackle different brand issues or different ways to grow in this demo or this and that. But I think from an accessibility and an ease to access onboarding, as we call it online, it actually has like the easiest onboarding in the world. And so they don't actually care about you guys because guess what? You guys are the audience that is hooked for life. Like you guys are the ones, you guys aren't going anywhere. Like you guys love this for reasons that have even nothing to do with the NBA because you love gambling, because you love data. Like, so you guys are so hooked. They have to find a way to keep the game accessible and fun because if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Maybe you guys would argue with me, no, Danny, what you're not realizing is they actually are experiencing more of a bleed of this data, of this audience because of this reason or that. But I guess what I'm saying is like, I don't know if that's necessarily true, right? And so from my perspective, we had to lean into this because it was almost like what the pocket cam did for poker. Everyone has made comparisons for chess and poker for so long. Like how did poker break, into the mainstream audiences before chess? But it really comes down to one simple fact that for people who know it or understand or not, it was the invention of the pocket cam because the moment the viewer at home had more knowledge than Phil Ivey, the viewing experience changed because you were sitting there like, holy shit, he had pocket aces and Helmuth just got a jack on the river. He doesn't know he's lost. His probability just went from like this to this, right? So you were on the edge of the seat, like Helmuth just shoved in and you're like, oh my God, is Ivey going to call him or not? Like, this is it, right? And he thought he was winning. And so the viewing experience changed when you gave the viewer more power than the pro. Guess what we've been trying to do in chess? Give the viewer more power than the pro for years because that's the only thing that is going to make it more accessible because guess what? You are never going to be as good as chess as Magnus Carlsen, let alone the engine, right? And so again, edutainment has been key, make people feel like they're learning and embrace that, leaning into more stories. And I think the emotional attachment will be key for the future. I have my team working very hard on chess with no sound because I think that's a big thing for us to do to just get second monitor viewing going, like golf, like other more boring sports. Sorry, baseball. Boring sports that you care about, but you don't have to watch every moment of. And then in the end, we have to continue to solve this problem of making people feel like they have more knowledge than the pro at home. Basketball does not have that problem. And that's what I would say.
Yeah, go ahead, Geoff, because I got to follow up, but you go ahead.
Well, there's just two things I wanted to touch on there. Number one, I love that you brought up being more like accessible to more people because when you talked about the whole card cam in poker, there's a small subset of poker players who I would probably assume are mostly really, really good poker players who actually would prefer to not have the whole cam at this point because they want to think like, oh, what's his range in this spot? What, like, they want to like learn and like if you're watching a really good player, like a Dan Smith we brought up earlier, or a Steven Chidwick or a Phil Ivey, and it's like, oh, he checks flop, bets turn, bets river. What range is he doing this with? You actually don't want to be biased by what his actual hand is. You're more interested in trying to figure out what range of hands he's doing with.
The game theory, yeah.
But the average viewer doesn't give a shit about that. The average viewer wants to. So in a way, you were just laughing about how like the NBA doesn't care about us and like for reasons. The poker, poker world probably doesn't give a shit what the top 1% of poker players want to watch. They care about what the most people want to watch. And then the second thing I just wanted to say, I don't even know if you know about this, but there's a I forget who does it. I forget what the company's called, but there's some poker training site that has a thing called like poker without audio. And what they do is they run these games where they'll play poker live for like an hour and everyone will wear noise canceling headphones. And every decision they make, they talk out loud and explain to the viewer what they're thinking on every single street. So I don't know, like for me, I could be a very small subset of person, but it could be interesting to me to like watch two people play chess in that similar environment and be like, here's what I'm thinking here. Here's why this move might be valid. And here's why another move might be valid. So
well, that's literally what the online audience is.
Yeah.
With Hikaru and others. Anyway, go ahead, XJ.
No, I was just going to say that's exactly what streaming is. And that's, I love obviously, the big dogs watching Hikaru, stream and just talk out everything that he's doing and everything that he's thinking. It's so interesting. It's so fun for exactly that reason that you described, Geoff. But I think this is so interesting. Everything that is going, this conversation is extremely interesting to me. So basically, Dan, you were saying the clock, the eval bar provides accessibility into the drama of the moment that the viewer would not otherwise have, because they don't realize this move made this situation to be very dramatic. They just don't have that information. So it provides that. Whereas when you're watching basketball, you look at the score, you look at the time, you hear the crowd, it's obvious what's going on. You don't need the eval bar. For me, so I think Geoff's point is the trump card. It's not accurate. So that's the problem. You probably can't get past that. But if it was, I think it would be really interesting to see, like, at the end of the game, okay, so if the Golden State Warriors hit a 3, it would change win probability like this. If they turned it over, it would change win probability like this. A foul would change win probability like this. Because typically when I'm watching the game live, let's say on playback with Nick's Film School or something like that, and I'm like, okay, a 3 kills us, a 3 kills us, a 3, it's over. Or they need to foul right away. A foul does this, a foul does this. I'm trying to provide that to the audience. I know this is a very dramatic situation. We all know that. But do we know, like, if X, Y, and Z happens, what that means for the outcome of the game? We don't. And so that's what, as an analyst, that's what I'm trying to teach the audience and show them. But I'm coming up with it on the fly and having that kind of visual and being like, literally, your chances go down. If you foul, your chances of winning go down by 30% just by making that one thing. That really clues the audience in on how important that decision is towards the outcome. So I guess if it was possible to do an accurate win probability bar, I think that would add some value in terms of providing additional greater accessibility into the drama of the moment and each individual decision that a team or a player makes in those moments.
Yeah, it's interesting. And then it kind of comes full circle back to the initial question you had about the computers, entering the game of chess probably much earlier than they did for other industries, and how we've dealt with that, how you tackle complete information, the sabermetrics of what the best decision is to make versus turn the engine off. I don't want to see it. You know what I mean? I don't want to see the answer. Whatever. And I think that there's I don't know why I just slipped into that accent based on, collecting information. I guess that was subconsciously revealing. But I'll say that it's still, I guess, just a question of what your goals are, right? Because in some ways, there is an audience for this, right? You guys have an audience. There's other audiences for it. And I think that how big that audience is comparative to the mainstream demo, I don't know, right? Because there's why has the NFL leaned into the Manning cast, right? Because not only is there an audience for the breakdowns that they're doing, there's the casual, fun nature of their relationship, but there's also, if I was to go back to the evolution of broadcasting, still has most sports keep the commentators off camera most of the time, right? Because you don't really care who they are. But actually, over time, people do care. Like, people actually like Joe Buck, or they like Peyton Manning, or they like the commentator, right? The streamer. And so they're that's an angle to lean into. Some people like the data and want to see complete information when they're watching anything because they don't like that element. Other people are like, no, right? And I guess what exactly can you reach that audience with a second show? Maybe the NBA should lean into that. Maybe there's, because everything that you just said, XJ, is kind of true, but you were also, this is back to Geoff's point. I would argue you were being biased in that every element, every breakdown you just described was under the assumption that the drama was real. Like, what do you do in a blowout? What do you do in games where the one team is favored by 20 at the start of the game, and the probability of 98% in 2 literally never changes the entire game?
Don't,
right?
Don't show that shit.
Right. No, okay, but the reason I said that is because I wanted to bring it back to the point of what we did early on. Was that early on in our embracing of the computers, we actually would turn off the eval bar sometimes mid-game or mid-match because we thought it was such a bad experience to be showing that it was lopsided, right? But then over time, instead of having a lopsided eval bar in a 7-hour game, we're like, let's actually make the games faster so that it goes up and down more, because that drama is fascinating and fun, and you get less blowouts. And even if you get a blowout, guess what? The game's only going to last for another 3 minutes. So sit tight. We're starting another one. But if you have a 7-hour game and it's a blowout the whole time, who wants to watch that shit, right? And it would be the same in the NBA. So under the whatever, if you were in a situation where a foul in a close game could literally affect the odds that much, or a coach's decision, but the problem is, I think those games, might be outdone by the amount of times that the probability, the complete information made the experience less enjoyable. I don't know. I mean, so I guess that's a long tangent. I want to say one other thing about the computers, though, because I think that, again, we as an industry, the chess world, had no choice, because in some ways, the evolution of computers and of AI like itself has always been directly connected to chess. Think about some of the biggest moments in the history of the breakthroughs of artificially intelligent and machine learning technology. What were they associated with? Deep Blue beating Kasparov in the 90s. Like, you don't even remember what happened, but you remember, like, some Russian dude lost to the IBM computer. Literally, you remember that as right? You both do, I bet, right? As a thing that happened in the world, even if you couldn't remember that the guy's name was Kasparov. That was a moment that happened that transcended the community. Then Google's DeepMind project tackled chess with this AlphaZero thing, and it literally rocked like an entire industry of in science and technology, right? And I could even go further back. The first computers in the history of humanity were actually built to play chess, like back in like MIT and Turing and all this stuff. So like, we've had to be a part of solving this problem of making the game feel accessible, keeping the drama alive, right? We got to keep it spicy in our relationship here, knowing that the end is nigh. It's only a matter of time, right? Now, again, I think that chess with faster time controls, with variants like Fisher Random, which set up the pieces slightly different, I think the death of chess has been greatly exaggerated, whatever that phrase is. At the same time, I don't know what you guys could come up with if somehow a new NBA commissioner came along and said, we are doing this from now on, we are going complete information on the shows. I would bet there's a thing you don't know about how you could figure that out, how you can make it more fun, how you could lean into the blowouts, right? So that's what I would argue is, like, I can't say that it's a bad idea because we don't know what we don't know. I just think that there's an argument to be made that if it's not broke, don't fix it, because you guys aren't going anywhere anyway. And that would be what I would say if I was in their spot.
Yeah, it's totally, it makes a ton of sense. And it's like, of course, the NBA is going to invest their resources into drawing new people into the game, as opposed to making it that much more interesting or entertaining for their most diehard viewers who aren't going anywhere anyway. That makes a ton of sense. Your explanation makes sense as well. Danny, we're coming to the end of our time. This has been a real pleasure. Honestly, I'm so appreciative of you coming on and spending some time with us. Conversation was awesome. We had sent you some talking points that we were going to touch on beforehand. I don't know if we touch on any of them.
I don't know. I got them right here on the laptop. I don't know if we accomplished this goal or not.
I think the best thing to say about this pod is that we don't know, because we just had an awesome free flowing conversation. That's exactly what we wanted to do with you. I love chess deeply. I love watching chess streaming. Just for your information, Danny, I'm about a 1900 bullet blitz and rapid. So, pretty solid there.
Geoff, that's pretty good. Geoff, so that's pretty good.
I believe it. Just from talking to him. I have one last question for you.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
That'll take you 5 seconds to answer. Is Robert Horry your most hated person, NBA player?
Oh my gosh.
As a neutral fan, I still have disdain for the Suns not winning that 2007 series.
Probably.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a period there where I hated Greg Popovich and every Spur because they just kept ruining our life. But now I love Greg Popovich, and he's just like a brilliant guy. Probably the best coach in NBA history as far as I'm concerned. We were talking about teams being ahead of their time. I mean, you're talking to two guys who have great appreciation for that I know they made it back to the Western Conference Finals in 2010, but they kind of fell off in 08 and 09. 05 to 07, the Suns, them not having a championship is honestly, it's like a stain on history. They were ahead of their time.
Horrible.
It's an all-time great team. Steve Nash is honestly one of the most underrated players. That version of Steve Nash is, people like to say he didn't deserve those MVPs.
D'Antoni.
Yeah, D'Antoni was ahead of his time. That was just a great team. You were like, it's a bummer you guys didn't get a championship during that stretch.
I appreciate that, honestly. And believe it or not, it does help a little bit, because now look at where I sit as a pretty heartbroken Suns fan with a new owner, a freaking situation that is like, we could probably now have another hour-long podcast on the difficulty that this Phoenix Suns franchise faces in the years ahead. But those years were incredible. And yeah, I think Steve Nash is one of the most influential and underrated, players of all time. And that team deserved better. Also the Matrix, Marion, also highly underrated. But all right.
we love Steve Nash, and since I just made you feel good, I also have to tell you. So we developed something here at Hot Hand Theory called the clone theory, which is basically like an analytical theory based on team building. And one of the examples we used as an anti-clone theory team is this Phoenix Suns team because they so yeah, it's
how not to build a team.
How not to build a team with superstars, because the idea is basically like they're so redundant, it's hard for them all to confer their.
And I'm sorry, but it wasn't that hard to see coming. And like the situation with Bridges and like. Bridges was so underrated, right? He held that team's defensive weaknesses together. You couldn't even see them because he was so long and so – anyway, I could go on and on about this. Like, I'm so frustrated by what they have done to that team that obviously didn't deliver against the Bucks, but it was closer than people thought. I think Mikal Bridges was really key, and it's very frustrating to think about the future of this franchise.
It's funny because we had this exact conversation about how they should not have broken up that team and went in the complete opposite direction, which – we're seeing that to be the case now. But to leave you on this sad note, I do want to get us out of here, and I'm sorry that we're leaving you with tears. But but I do want to say, talking about growing the game, I wonder if you want to take a moment, Danny, to like talk to our NBA fan audience about why they might want to get into playing chess, watching chess. I don't know if you want to say anything about that before we. No,
I don't want to do any of the shameless self-promo. I will just say that I think chess is more fun and maybe even more addictive, if that's a good or bad thing, I don't know, than people realize. And if they haven't given it a try, like in a good way, because I would argue that chess inherently within the game itself teaches critical thinking skills, cause and effect, the consequences of your own actions if it isn't the consequences of my own bad decisions, right? And I would say that there's a reason a lot of studies have been associated with chess being great for cognitive development, fights off memory loss. So that, I guess that is my pitch from the very true perspective that if chess helps your brain be smarter and smarter people make the world a better place, you should consider playing more chess. That is one of the cool things that makes our mission kind of an infinite one and pretty cool in terms of regardless of the business tactics that come with presenting content and how we're growing the bottom line of the company. The truth is chess, from our point of view, is good for humanity. And so we love that. We feel super, super fortunate about that. And yeah, so if you haven't given it a try just to develop a new healthy habit that could release some good dopamine in terms of all the games people are addicted to, they should probably consider the chess.com app, as the next one they try.
So if you're someone like me and you really enjoyed this episode and really enjoyed the things you had to say and you're like, I want to get into it, is that the optimal way to engage with your content?
Yes, you can find us at pretty much anywhere /chess, YouTube /chess, Facebook /chess. Like we've been pretty lucky. There's sometimes it's chess.com or whatever, but if we're on, you can follow us on all the things, the media that is anything but social. We're everywhere.
So, Danny, we did. Yeah, go ahead, Geoff.
I was gonna say that's wilder than Hot Hand Theory being available on all the platforms. Like we came up with this name and XJ was like, no chance it's available everywhere, and it was just randomly available on every single social media. But chess, that takes the cake.
Thanks again so much for joining us. By the way, we forced you into that plug. It was a shameful plug. I can tell you didn't want to do it, but thank you for doing it for us. Yeah, thank you so much again for being on. For Danny, for Geoff, I'm XJ. This has been Hot Hand Theory.